Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I have a great guest today, Joseph Cacciabato. And Joe is the author of Garlic Cloves and Red Underwear, and After Laughing Comes Crying. So, welcome, Joe. Thanks for being here.
It's good. Nice to be here, Bob. Thanks for doing
Oh,
this.
it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So, certainly want to talk about the books, especially Garlic Clothes and Red Underwear with some of these superstitions. But before we do that, where's your family from in Italy?
Well, my father's family was from Poggioreale. From um, um, my mother's family is from Poggioreale. My father's family is from Cotaballato, a little village down below Cotaballato called Sant'Anna. So it's called Sant'Anna di Cotaballato, and that's where he's from. My grandfather came to the United States. He through New Orleans in 1900, and my
Yeah,
grandmother came about 3 years later to get married to him.
yeah. And so you're Sicilian. So that wasn't out of the ordinary for Sicilians to go to Louisiana, correct?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, in my first book, After Laughing, it's about how the Sicilians, in the early days, New Orleans was a place where the Sicilians sent citrus fruit. And so they had a lot of Sicilians going into New Orleans with on the boats bringing citrus from Sicily, and so a lot of them stayed. And so, but after around the Civil War, uh, the plantation owners were having trouble keeping labor, so they actually sent people to Sicily to recruit workers to come down to New Orleans. They tried recruiting other people. They tried recruiting Norwegians, but the temperature and the climate wasn't to their liking. But New Orleans was kind of same climate as Sicily, so they did pretty well down there. So they actually recruited them to come work the cane fields and the cotton fields in New Orleans. So a lot of them stayed, saved their money, and then when the plantation owners had to sell off their places because the Civil War, you can imagine during the Civil War they couldn't plan anything, they couldn't do anything, and they still had the expenses of keeping the places going. So they started selling off a little of the plantations, a little at a time, and the Sicilians had the money because they had been saving their money, and so they'd buy a little plot of land and farm it themselves. So that's how the Sicilian the truck they call them truck farmers down south in Louisiana. So there were a bunch of those. So my
Oh,
dad was part of that.
oh, wow! I didn't know that. And so, did you grow up in New Orleans or in
I did.
Louisiana?
I grew up in New Orleans. I grew up on the west bank of New Orleans. The peninsula of Louisiana goes out into the Gulf, and that peninsula, the parishes in Louisiana, not counties, and that peninsula is called Plaquemines Parish, and so there was a lot of sugarcane plantations down there, and of course later on there was a lot of oil and of course seafood, a lot of offshore oil down there. So that's where I grew up around New Orleans.
Yeah, when we were talking earlier, you said that I guess your grandparents and your father they didn't talk about Sicily much, right?
Not at all. My dad didn't seem to be interested, and as a matter of fact, well, I'll tell you this story here. I didn't even know the correct spelling of my name because that's the not the correct spelling, and it's not because the old man came through the New Orleans immigration office and they misspelled it. It's because they just kind of fiddle around with the names. So I was in school in Texas, and I'm going through the line. In those days, you didn't have computers; you had to sign up. And I give the guy my name, and he says, "Cacciabato, what is that?" And I said, "It's Italian." He says, "Italian? That doesn't look Italian. That AU doesn't look too Italian to me. and apparently he had studied the Italian language. So that kind of said, well, wait a minute, am I Italian? I didn't know, you know. So this kind of started me on a to say, well, what I should know more about my heritage here. This is silly. I don't even know how to spell my own name. And so this got me going on. So I wrote to I when I started getting on the computer, I saw this name Cacciabaldo. It's called Cacciabaudo, Cacciabaldo. And so I wrote to this gentleman in Sicily, Giuseppe, in English. I write to him in English, and it turns out Giuseppe is an English teacher. And so he writes back to me and he says, "Yeah, Cacciabaldo is the real way to spell it." And he gave me some information. It's partly Piedmontese, partly it's got some French in it and that kind of stuff. So that's what led me to start on my journey to find out my heritage. But my dad didn't know anything about it, and the only hint that I ever got, I remember at his funeral, an uncle of mine mentioned Santa Anna, and that was the first time I'd ever heard. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know my dad's real name because they called him Jack, but his real name was Serafino. And so, that's how closed off he was about, the old country.
Wow, that's some story. Yeah. Well, most of them didn't talk about it.
No.
So what made you want to write the book, Garlic Clothes and Red Underwear?
Well, what happened is I belong to a bunch of Facebook Italian groups, and I kept seeing these sayings come up. The same things that I grew up with, and I'm sure you did too. And I kept saying, well, uh, I have a Jewish friend, I have an Irish friend. They all say the same thing. So this stuff must have been at some time must have had some validity. It must have worked, especially the things on healing. They must have worked because they've gone on too long. So I said, well, I want to find out where these came from, and of course with the internet you can do it in your own home. I mean, so I started doing research, and there's a great resource called Internet Archive, and if you don't know about it, you should check it out. It's called Internet Archive, and you can get books from all over the world free, and you can check them out for a half hour, and about an hour, and read whatever. And so I did a lot of research on Internet Archive and on the internet, and come to find out a lot of these things have actual validity in science, especially the healing things. Which people think that's all sayings, but they don't really work. My dad always used to tell us they used to rub kerosene on their cuts, when they were kids. They didn't have antiseptic, and they weren't going to take them to a doctor out in the country. And I always thought, oh yeah, kerosene. Well, I did research, and turns out kerosene comes from plants that have been plants and animals that have been fermenting underground from hundreds of years, and they actually have antiseptic value to them, antiseptic properties to them. So that kind of got me interested in that. Yeah.
Oh wow, I never heard that one. So I know one of the things that you in the book is August and May being unlucky. So why are August and May unlucky?
Yeah. What I found out is that they're not so much unlucky. It's that they are months that are set aside to celebrate the Virgin Mary. August and May are months that are set aside where they have just about every day, or at least it used to be, every day there was a church gathering, a service, and so not only would it be difficult to schedule a wedding and not interfere with a church service that celebrated Mary's birth and Mary's life, Virgin Mary's life. It would have been, it may have been you're trying to take away her glory and bring attention to yourself in those months. So it was not so much an unlucky month. It was that you're kind of interfering with the church, so your wedding might not be blessed so much in those if you married in those months. And of course, people get married in those months now and have happy marriages, but probably back then, it was that was probably the basis of it. Also, there was something that I read about whenever a country was defeated, a lot of these soldiers would just grab up some woman and marry her, and whether she wanted to get married or not, So apparently that has to do with some of those months too as being unlucky. So that's basically it.
Tell us about red underwear.
Well, a funny thing is, Ray Romano, I think his family's from Bysiguino, Sicily. Ray Romano was on You Want to Be a Millionaire, and he's playing for charity. And they asked him the question, red underwear, wearing red underwear over night, over New Year's. Is that, well, they gave him three superstitions that Italians do. And one of them was the red underwear. He didn't know it, and he lost $250,000. So red underwear, there's a tradition that if you wear it overnight into New Year's, it brings good luck. Red is a color that wards off, like the malokia, the evil eye. Red that wards off evilness, and I think that's based. I think that's based coming from India. I believe, because Indians believe in different energy systems on the body, and red is a grounding color. It's a color that it grounds you. It says, hold on, take it easy, think about what you're doing, those kinds of grounding. So red and anything like the pepper that they wear, the malokia, red ribbon on the car, everything red seems to be it's good luck. So
you saw the Malachi is an interesting one, because we all grew up with that, right? We all grew up with the
Yes.
evil eye.
Yes.
So how does one give somebody the evil eye?
Well, the belief is this, that if they're envious of you, or you what was the word, you embarrass them or dishonor them, they give you the evil eye. And it's now an interesting thing is, the voodoo doll in Cajun in the African thing, the voodoo doll is an image and they stick pins in it and all that stuff. Well, sometimes in Malokia they do the same thing. In the olden days, if they went to your house, they might pick up maybe I don't know, anything, a toothpick, a match you used, and they'd bring it home and put it under the bed and wish evil on it to give you the malokia, the evil eye. So, or maybe they find steal at home, anything that belonged to you, they would do that and give you the evil eye.
Yeah, and the horn protects you from the evil eye, as we all remember.
Yeah, a bunch of things. The mono I can't think of the name of it, Bano something or other. And it's this way, and I think it's down that protects you. You know, you can do down, and of course it has the same shape as the horseshoe. The horseshoe, and there's a belief that this thing here creates an energy in here that protects you. Yeah, and so, and as it turns out, in physics, you know, the horseshoe and the positive and magnetic poles, uh, uh, you know, it turns out that metal seems to kind of neutralizes some kind of energies. After all, everything is energy, and so these things are based on energetic fields, really.
Yeah. Now, so I was born on the 13th, so I always use 13 as my lucky number. I didn't know until I read your book that
Yeah.
13 is a lucky number in Italy.
It is a lucky number in Italy, yeah. And after we talked about that, I looked in my book and I realized I had not written down why 13 is an unlucky number. And so I did some research on it, and it turns out that 13 supposedly is an unlucky number because uh, Judas is the 13th person at the table, and of course he betrayed Christ, and so that's kind of what they consider the lucky number. Also, let's see, I got a name here. Let me find it. Uh, yeah, in Norse mythology, Loki was a dinner guest who sat at the table too, and he got angry over somebody, and so he caused the whole world to go into chaos. So some of these things come mythology, some of them come from, you know, the Bible.
Yeah. See, now I always heard that 13 was unlucky because, or at least Friday the 13th, because that was the day that the French king went out to kill all the Knights Templar.
Well, it could have been too. Yeah,
But that's Friday the 13th, not necessarily just 13.
Yeah.
But why is it considered lucky in Italy?
Is it considered lucky in Italy? That's a good question. I think let me see what I wrote about that. It seems to me, um, I think that's the day. I'm gonna have to look that up. Let me see. Um, let me find it. I marked it because I knew we were going to talk about this. It has to do with something that happened in Italy on the 13th, and I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on it. But
Well, that's okay. Well, everybody could buy the book and find out what it
yeah, maybe they should.
is.
I'm blanking out on it, but yeah, that's a good question.
Now,
I'm not sure.
I know the other thing that you have in the book. You have a lot of stuff about money. I always remember throwing the change in the car, and if you gave somebody a wallet, you were supposed to put money in it because that brought. But there's a lot of stuff about money, good
Yeah,
and bad. Yeah.
yeah. You know, I'm sure you. I've always, as a kid, I'd always hear my dad talking about the old man burying money, and and the whole family says, "Yeah, I know he put it in a barn. I know he had all this money." And in talking to other Italian friends, especially, it's always been, "Yeah, he had money. You know, they took it on a boat or coming over." So money's always been a thing with Italians. So, but basically, the money putting into the purse, or giving money to someone over New Year's, or sweeping money back into the house after you swept it out. It has to do with, you know, things attract, likes attract. So if you give somebody, put somebody money in their purse, you know, it kind of primes the purse, like primes the pump to bring on more money. So that's basically what that's about.
And there were things that you're not supposed to do with money because that means you're not going to have any, right?
Yeah, money on a table. To put money on a table is supposedly bad luck. And Bob, I forgot to tell you this. These things that I wrote about, I put out a question on all my Facebook posts on all my Facebook groups, and I asked people to send me these. So all these things that I have in a book were sent to me by other people. And so as they sent it to me, I did research on them, you know. And so, but money on the table supposedly brings bad luck, and for a few reasons. Uh, the table is a family gathering place. It's a place that you don't want to dishonor by bringing in business, you know. Also, money's been handled by a lot of people, and that's like putting a shoe on a table. You know,
Mhm.
it's just not, you know, it's not safe. I mean, it's not what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's dirty. The money's dirty. You know, it's been touched by a lot of people. So those kinds of things make sense. Makes sense. I
And
also like a shoe on a bed. Don't put shoe on you know, shoes on a table, shoes on the chairs. That's kind of it's kind of it shows disregard for the sacredness of those places, you know. And
well, and the
so
same thing with the umbrella, right? Opening an umbrella in the house, and
yeah,
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that the umbrellas. Well, you do see it in the movies. I didn't realize the umbrellas were originally made though to protect people from the sun, not to keep the
yeah,
rain off.
yeah. My research shows that they were made for people, yeah, in Egypt, and protected from the sun, and only royalty were able to have them, because and as a matter of fact, if you were a commoner and the shade of the umbrella went over you, you were gone. They took you out and
No,
killed you.
really?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and then of course later on, it's bad like to open an umbrella inside, but what I say in my book about that is. You know, when we think of umbrellas now, we think of the little red ones and the little blue ones and the little cute things. But back then, they were, you know, things with spines coming out, and they were sticking out, very unsafe when they were open. These spines were sticking out all over the place. So you have an umbrella and you turn it around on the inside with these spines, you could get very well, and be unlucky for the person you stab. That's for sure. So that makes sense too, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I always remember trying to get on the bus in New York City with an umbrella. I was just because you didn't want to get wet, and then you're trying to close the umbrella and
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so now garlic, other than Dracula, you know, not being wanted near be near garlic. What's this? What's this?
Well,
We
garlic,
grew up with garlic, right? So
yes, and you know, and if you go on the internet and look up the benefits of garlic, as a matter of fact, after we talked, I just decided, yeah, I'd look up some of this stuff and because it's been a while since I wrote the book. But you look up on the internet, and there's all kinds. Garlic supposedly has compounds and enzymes or whatever that could lower blood pressure. Uh, they could lower cholesterol. They have antiseptic, not antiseptic, but the antibodies, and so there are all kinds of benefits from garlic. Um, One interesting thing though is that the Indians don't use a lot of garlic. They might now, but because garlic and onions, which have a lot of healthy uh, uh, things, parts to them, are also things that can make you more anxious too. So it makes you uptight and so maybe this is why a lot of Italians are, you know, uptight to eat a lot of garlic. Very excitable.
yeah, and John had a comment there, and yeah, I agree with you, John. Let me put this other one up. Do you think there's still an unspoken caste system in Italy?
Yes,
I
I know.
think so. I
Yeah,
think so.
there's also an unspoken thing, well, I shouldn't get into that, but there is a difference between North and South Italy.
Oh,
Still,
big.
still,
Right.
and so and that's just the way it is. It's the same thing in this country. So in the United States. So those things don't go away. Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, and that's the my parents came from, as we spoke earlier. My parents came from two vastly different socioeconomic groups, and they never would have been close in Italy. They never would have got married in Italy.
No,
But in
no.
America, it didn't matter. They both were in Corona. They both were Americans,
Hmm.
and that's just what happened.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and the other well, there's so much good stuff in the book. But I was thinking about, you mentioned the mirrors and photography, and we all remember. I think it was was it the old cowboy movies where they didn't want to take the Indians didn't want their picture taken or something like that because they thought
Yeah.
it captured them, right?
Captured the soul.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it captured the soul, and so yeah, they don't they don't want that. Yeah. Also, an interesting thing is, and I'm uh, in the early days, priests were not supposed to have mirrors,
Really, I
because
didn't know that.
yeah, priests were not supposed to have mirrors because to look at yourself is a vain, and so it would, for a priest for you to go into a priest's, house and see a lot of mirrors, which would make you think that he's vain and he wasn't humble and that kind of stuff. So yeah, mirrors, and of course the breaking, the 7 years bad luck each. In Italy, when they toast, they break the glass, Centano, Centano. All the pieces mean good luck. With a mirror, all the pieces mean bad luck because it's
Yeah,
captured.
so now that's something I learned because I went to a few Jewish weddings and they break the glass. I didn't realize that they did that in Italy.
Yeah, yeah. Then they break the glass, and another thing they do in Italy in New Year's, I've seen movies of this, is they throw plates out of the windows, and New Year's, and supposedly the shards, of mean good luck, a bunch of good luck during the year.
Oh, that's something. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Uh, so fig trees. We all grew up with the fig tree in Grandpa's backyard. What's the significance of fig trees?
I just think it's, I think the fig tree, and you see them all over Italy, right on the roadside and everything else. The fig tree, I think, was the one thing that my dad held on to from Italy. Uh, we always had a fig tree, and he would, and that would be the first thing whenever we moved. He would plant a fig tree, and it's just, just a part of being Italian, I suppose, is having a fig tree. I had a friend of mine who's from Chicago, and his father had a fig tree, and Chicago was the winters. But his dad had figured out how to cover that tree, bend it over enough to cover it with newspaper and tarpaulin for the winter. Come spring, you take it all off and regenerate the fig tree. And so that's how dear the fig tree is to Italians. It's just a kind of like garlic, you know. It's
Well,
part of
yeah,
being
no, and
Italian.
that was we had the fig tree every year. It was cut down and covered, and then the spring it was taken up
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
Uh, I tell you, right versus left was interesting because my brother's older than me. He's 5 years older than me. My brother was still well, is old enough, I guess, where the nuns used to try to make him write with
Mm.
his right hand. My
Oh
mother had to
wow.
go to school,
Oh wow.
and this was in Queens, New York. This wasn't in Italy.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I've written another thing. I'll have to send you a copy of it because I went into more detail of right versus left. But a lot of that has to do with, of course, the brain. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The right side of the brain is uh, a more what I want to say artistic. It doesn't. It's the left side is more. I call it meat and potatoes. let's get down to the facts. This happens, this happens, this happens. But the right side, which controls the left. So I think that has something to do with, in the olden days, if you were left-handed, you were thinking, you were using the right side of the brain. You didn't care too much about going out and hunting for food or making sure things were done. You were more kind of laissez-faire. And I think that kind of started it. Also, the Bible has a bunch of things about the left side. You sit on the right hand of God. I think on the cross, the guy, the man crucified on his right was the one that asked for his forgiveness. The guy on the left, and said, "Hey, if you're such a great guy, get us down from here." So those kinds of things have made the left side the bad guy and the right side the good guy. And if you look up in the dictionary, sinister means left, and so those kinds of things over here. So, but I can see why they try to get the demon out of him, make him right in the right hand, because the demon's in him and making him be left-handed. The sisters.
Yeah, and I found the angels one to be interesting. I never heard about misbehaving or you cause the angels to cry, but we all grew up with if you make an ugly face at the table, you're going to stay like that.
Yeah, you heard that one too. That's great. Yeah, I got a comment from one of my people from Facebook. She said she was always doing something to make the angels cry.
And I never heard that one. I never heard
Yeah.
about the angels crying. But you have a story about the 101 angels.
Yeah,
Sicilian legend.
yeah. That was from a pamphlet. My sister and my brother used to every St. Joseph's Day would help make cookies in this little town in Louisiana. And they put out a little pamphlet, and that little pamphlet mentioned that thing, so I kind of embellished it a little bit and put it in the book about the 101 angels. And basically, it's this lady who is this thief is trying to. She knows she has money, and so he tries to steal it from her. But every day he goes to the house, and there's people out working in the garden while she's away. And finally, he decides to come there at night. So he comes at night. And he tries to pick up his tools to break in, and he can't lift them. And so, anyway, the point is that she's had these angels looking over all this time. So that's kind of basically what it is. You have to get the book to read the rest of the story.
Yeah, and there's a lot about blessings crossed when I grew up you had to make the sign of the cross when you cross the church.
Yeah.
I never heard the one about the sirens or some of those other ones, but that's kind of interesting. That's in the book, all the sign of the cross, which I hate to say it, but I think Italians were pretty superstitious people.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing too. Let me tell you, there's a book I was reading, and it's about. I wrote this down. It was written in 1911 or so, and it's called "The Fairy Faith of Celtic Counties." Fairy faith. There are still people in Ireland who swear that they're fairies, and so as I guess people in all countries have a kind of superstition about them, and it comes from in the old days people were connected to nature. They're connected to nature, and so if they walked out into a forest, an old man who had lived his life in a forest, he could walk outside and know whether it's going to rain or not, just by the way the air felt. He could walk out into the forest and know, this tree is going to die just by the energy he got from it. So, of course, over the years, we've lost all that. Some of that stuff, some of that energy, some of those feelings that we have and have had, we call superstitious. but their intuition. And so we've been taught to disavow that. Don't because you don't be superstitious, you know. So but some of that stuff is innate. It's imbued in us because we're generations from that, and we still have that DNA that picks up. I have picked up on some of that stuff. Anyway, that's my thought on that.
Well, yeah, and I think, back then, they couldn't explain things scientifically, so they had to come up with something, I
Yeah,
guess, to explain, why everybody was dying all of a sudden, or
yeah,
why when there was an eclipse, what was happening to it, because there was no science to back it all up.
yeah,
So yeah, you have to understand that probably made a lot of sense back then,
yeah, yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's for people listening that just, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, there's just so much stuff. We couldn't even touch on a little bit of it. There's so much in the book. So if you're interested in where these things got to start, and there's also some great stories in there, or short stories about different types of things, like the one we mentioned about the angels and everything.
Yeah.
So the other book, what's the other book, Joe?
The other book, if I may, I'll hold it up for you. It's this is the first one I wrote. After laughing comes crying, and it's a fictional historical fiction, and it's about my grandfather. It's the research I did on him coming over from Sicily, 1900, into New Orleans. But it's also based on a book that Vincenza Scarpacci wrote. She did it for New York University, as a matter of fact, for a doctoral thesis, and it was about Louisiana Sicilians on Louisiana plantations. And so I used a lot of the research from her, and also Donna Guardati, I think it's Guardati, and of course Gambino, Richard Gambino's book. And so it's about this. It's in Sicily first. It's in a little town, Sant'Anna, and how life was there. It's pretty rough. They were taxed. After Garibaldi came into Sicily, he claimed everything would be fine. These landowners, these landowners own all this land and a lot of them lived in northern Italy, and they were just growing the weeds. Well, they would let Sicilians work them, but the Sicilians had to give them probably 60% of what they got off the land. So they would live on the land just to have a place to live and to have something to do. So anyway, it was terrible. So they started hearing, and people started coming into Sicily to recruit them. So that's kind of what the book's about. It's about them coming in to Sicily to recruit these workers, and my grandfather is among the workers who leave. And so it also talks about how it was on the ship going back, coming over to the United States. Some of the stuff they had to endure on the ship, coming over, living underneath, next to the engines and the anchor and down, and so and it took about I think maybe 18-20 days to get to the United States, uh, and terrible conditions. And so anyway, it addresses all that, and it talks about them working on plantations, on the sugarcane plantations, and gradually how these people work the money they earned, and the conditions, and they in those days they worked right aside the slaves, and right the black people, and believe it or not, Sicilians, although they were pretty close to Africa, they didn't have a lot of black people that they dealt with in Sicily. So the black people over there, they didn't think anything about mixing with them or talking to them or helping them out. And so a lot of the white people that worked didn't like that. They didn't like the way they were hobnobbing with them. So anyway, all of that stuff is in the book, and it shows you eventually how they save their money, and little by little bought acreage to a farm. And so my grandfather owned a farm in a place called Fort Oaks, Louisiana, and it's about 110 acres. And the whole family farmed it. And then he would drive into New Orleans to go to the French market, and they would sell their vegetables there at the French market. And,
Yeah, and see, and that's just, I don't think a lot of people don't realize the Sicilian influence in Louisiana or New Orleans in particular, and the lynching that took place
yeah,
back then.
yeah,
That's lost on a lot of people.
yeah. I just did just wrote a thing. I'm trying to get published about a little incident in Louisiana. I lived out pretty much in the country, and so it wasn't the same as in the city. You know, you had boroughs and sections that were all Italian. We were mixed in, and we didn't make a big deal out about being Italian. It was no. My dad did. He would watch television and say, "Hey, he's Italian," that kind of thing. But us as kids, we were mixed in with French, Germans, English people. Going to school out in the country, and we were all mixed in. So we didn't make a big deal about being Italian. So we didn't really try to learn that much about it. It was we were American kids, that kind of thing. So I forgot where I was going with that thing, but in oh yeah, but there is a place in Louisiana called Independence, and Independence is all Italian, and it's as a matter of fact, next month they're having an Italian fair. And so the people there, and there was a story that I just researched. Uh, 6 guys from New Orleans, or 5 guys from New Orleans, thought they'd go rob a bank because strawberries are very big around that part of the country. They furnish strawberries to a lot of the country. So during strawberry season, they would put the money in this little bank. They have it ready to buy and whatever. So these guys knew about it, and they decided they're going to rob this bank. Five Sicilians, and they drove there to rob the bank, and they were going across this guy's backyard, and he tried to stop them, and they killed him. So there was a big trial in Amy, Louisiana, which is around this place, and all 5 guys were convicted. And so, but one guy said no, because there was only one shot that killed him, one bullet that killed him, but they didn't know who did it. One guy claimed that he did it, but they hung all 5 of them.
Mm.
They hung them, and so you heard about the lynching, but there are other little parts of Louisiana and also Mississippi and Alabama that you never heard about. Lynchings, and lynching means killing, not necessarily hanging, but lynching means to take the law into your own hands and kill them. However, that's what lynching really means.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. And well, with the case of that New Orleans thing, they actually did hang them, but again, people don't realize that, especially back then, Italians were really second-class citizens, maybe even third-class citizens. The first Italians that came here, they
They were
weren't.
very, very much so. And when they came over into the plantations, they didn't make as much as the blacks, who were
Really?
considered low people. But the blacks knew how to do the work, and they got paid a little extra then. But the Sicilians didn't get paid as much as them, and in those days it didn't matter. But to them, because they were making a lot more money than they made in Sicily.
Would they? Do you know? Because I know when they started bringing the Italians into New York, they told them they were going to go to South America, and then they dumped them in New York because it was cheaper, and there was a lot of there were a lot of unscrupulous people in Italy that were putting these people on the ships. Were the Sicilians? Do you know? Were they promised something other than what they got when they got to Louisiana?
No, because Louisiana, people just didn't decide to go over there. Louisiana came up with a bureau to go over there and recruit. So there were certain rules to that bureau. And in that time, there was a rule in the United States. You could not guarantee somebody work to bring them into the country. I don't know how they got around it. I don't remember. But in Louisiana, they got around it. And but when you came through customs, if they ask you, have you been promised work? Everybody said no. And so but when they came, they knew they were going to be working on a plantation for such and such a guy, and probably they may have promised them more money and better working conditions. But as far as the work itself, they knew what they were going to get into.
Yeah. See, so yeah, their names escape me now. It's Joe and Joe Tucciaroli, and I can't remember the other guy. They wrote the book Swindle to New York, and these people were told they were going to go to South America, and then they dropped them in New York, and there was no work in New York. There was nothing in New York at the time, and they put them on Ward's Island for a while, and what happened was there was a big snowstorm, and they had to clean up the snow. There was no plow. There was no, nothing. So they got all the Italians from this off of Ward's Island, had them clean up the snow.
Yeah.
And then people realized that they were hard workers.
Oh yeah.
So then word got around to like places like Ohio and Pittsburgh and places in West Virginia that needed laborers.
Yeah.
And so that's how, a lot of the Italians that came in the late 1870s, early 1880s, wound up in all those other places, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia.
Oh, yeah. All the subways were dug by the Italians. And
that's right.
These big skyscraper buildings, they'd have to dig way into the earth to put the foundations to make them stand. Those were all Italians, too. I'm not saying they're only Italians, but most of them were Italian. So yeah, they did the dirty work because they were glad to have work.
Well, yeah, and they just sure they just wanted to work. My uncle he came from Italy. He was left behind by my grandparents, and he came and he became a mason. He mixed cement for a living. That's that's what he did. He was a farmer there, and he made cement over here, and for some reason, I still haven't figured it out yet. All the Barese men delivered ice in New York City for some strange reason. I don't know how that or why, but that's what happened. Probably somebody got a nice business going, and they brought people over from Bari, and they would do it. And in my grandfather's case, my grandmother's brother had a nice house or whatever, and that's how he got into the business. So one last thing before we go, and I think I know the answer, but I want to ask you: have you done DNA, and have you found anything interesting in your DNA?
Nothing that I didn't suspect, and I did it with Ancestry, and about 89% is Italian, and some of it from other little parts, some of it unknown, but it's mostly East European, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that's that. Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't think you find a lot of East European and Sicilian, but I suppose they make.
Well, that's the thing, and that's what I've been trying to find out is that name with that, with that spelling, it must have come from northern Italy down to Sicily, and I have a suspicion that uh, in the olden days, and this is only my suspicion, but if there was a woman, if a man had only daughters, he didn't have a man to inherit anything. The land would go to a daughter, and if she got married, she didn't want the husband to take over the land, so they would combine the names.
Hmm.
And so I got a feeling that maybe because it doesn't Cacciabaldo means a brave hunter, but we weren't hunters; we were farmers, and I kind of think maybe way back then they may have combined some names together to get that name. That's all.
Yeah, yeah,
I
no,
feel.
that's really that's very possible. So
Yeah.
where can people find the books, both books, if they want to buy them?
Amazon is probably the best place. I don't make a money, and neither do the publishers on Amazon. But it's the quickest way for them to get it, and easiest way for them to get it, and they can get them both on Kindle. And I also have a book. I don't have a copy here, but it's about Sicilians working in the coal mines in Illinois, which is an interesting topic too.
Oh
Because
yeah, what's the name of
yeah,
that book?
that's called Not for Self, Not for Self. And it's about a distant relative of mine who became a bootlegger and he was murdered in Illinois. Um, Supposedly over $8 rent, but I don't believe that. It was other thing. He was involved in other stuff.
You never know. Back then, $8 was a lot of money. You don't
It was
know.
a lot of money. Yeah,
A lot
yeah,
of money.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, listen,
And
Joe. Thanks again. I appreciate it. This has been great fun.
it's been great fun, and I appreciate being part of this. And I want to commend you for doing this, because this is history, and you're recording it, and because our generation is moving on, and so it's a valuable thing you're doing, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And that's why I do it because, my biggest fear is that we lose our history, we lose our heritage, and we really we can't let that happen.
No, no, no. And the funny thing is, we care more about it than the Sicilians. The Sicilians don't care about that. The American Sicilians don't care, or American Italians too.
Yeah, but
Care about.
they just have to walk down the street and see history.
Well, that's true. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
They
Okay.
they live. I'm just blown away by when you go some of these towns and 500, 600, 1,000 years old. It's just unbelievable.
Olive trees, especially in Puglia, the olive trees, thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen. Thanks again. I appreciate it, and
Okay.
we'll talk again soon.
Wonderful. I look forward. Take care.